Chapter 22. Red Girl. They called her Ingen Rued, which meant Red Maiden in their barbarian tongue. When she first found out what it meant, she was insulted and killed the thrall who had given translation. Yes, her hair was a violent shade of red, her skin the colour of a bleached papyrus, flecked with tiny frecklings from her time spent at sea on the decks of her dragon ship. The mainsail, her boat hoisted up, was the same colour, dyed to set fear into the hearts of any who saw it sailing into their straits, sending the message that there would soon be blood in the fields and farms, monasteries and fortresses of whatever harbour she deigned to berth her ship in. And in truth she may have been female, but she towered well over 6 feet and wielded a battle-axe, sword, and spear, better than 9 out of 10 of the Shield brothers who served in her boat. It was the maiden part that galled her, made her flush red, and cut the slave down in the feast hall. She was no maiden. She had given her maidenhead at 13 to a fool, a handsome and charming one, but a fool nonetheless, and he had proven to be half the warrior he claimed to be when he courted her. 17, when they awkwardly consummated the beast with 2 backs, he would not live to see his 18th year, killed by villagers who bludgeoned him to death with farming implements. Yes, they had all been burned alive for their troubles, but no child of Odin, no real Ostman, would fall at the hands of peasants while out on a Viking raid. His body had been left where it fell by his fellow raiders. There would be no Valkyries leading him over the Rainbow Bridge, no Valhalla for him. One of his companions told her what happened, and it filled her with rage and shame. She would not believe it at first. In her mind, he had been a man, the warrior that she aspired to be. She would not have given him her maidenhead otherwise. She came to accept it as hard truth when it was confirmed by the other surviving members of the raiding party. Ashamed and humiliated, she decided to settle the score by taking what she believed she was due. It was in his tent that she appropriated her first pair of iron-headed axes and the Carolingian sword her lover had looted from an Irish monastery. Although she had purchased better axes with steel heads and ornate gold and silver inlays over the intervening years, she still carried the sword, and though she preferred the heft of an axe, the sword had been a welcome weapon that she bent to her purpose when necessary. She told her mother why she murdered the slave, and her mother laughed. Her mother explained that to these Christians, to be a maiden was glorious. The maidenhead, a sacred thing to be held on to until it was won in marriage. Laughable indeed. But it cheered her that Red Maiden was meant as an honour and not ridicule, so she bent it to her own ends. From then on, when she raided the Irish coast, she made sure that all knew that the Ingen Rued had come to take what was hers. For a decade, she savaged the coasts with her Shield brothers and Shield sisters. They raped and pillaged, castrated and enslaved, and loaded her fleet of dragon ships with slaves and plunder that she sold at Hedeby and Birka. It was there, at Birka, that she met her ending in a simple drunken quarrel. She killed 4 men, including the chieftain of the offending tribe and his sons, before a long axe felled her from behind, killing her instantly as it split her skull clean in 2. And now this. This was not Valkyries, no Valhalla, no Great Hall, no Odin and his pantheon, no Freya, no Folkvanga either, though to be sent to the great field instead of the hall of the slain would have felt like a cheat too. Alas, that would have been nowhere near as ignominious as her current state of affairs. When she came to, she had no sense of where she was or where she had been, as if she was awaking from a blackout drunk in the mead hall. There was pain everywhere, and wounds to go with it that she could not explain. The clothing chafed and stifled her so much that she had torn it off in an effort to free herself of the sense of being suffocated by its buttons and bindings. When she was naked, the feeling did not disappear. It was then that she realized something was terribly wrong. She had no breasts, and between her thighs a cock and balls. Ridiculous. She had sometimes wondered what it would be like to be a man and carry a weapon at your beck and call at all times, and now she knew. There was no glory in it at all. As much as they strutted and swung their cocks about with bravado, she saw now that a prick and balls were 100 times more a vulnerability than a source of strength. As soon as she found a bayonet, she remedied the situation. There was pain, but more a sense of pain than any actual anguish. And there was blood, perhaps all the blood the body had left. But she did not die. She painted the man's blonde hair red with the blood, and dressed herself again in the dead man's clothes. And though there was no armour to be seen, she was glad to find his cavalry sword. She was not herself, and the self she remembered was beginning to vanish from her memory. She held on to what she could, flashes of violence and ecstasy. But a hunger was beginning to come over her, an insatiable need to kill and maim, to mete out pain and punishment. The first night had been a thing of unbridled joy, a veritable orgy of violence, between the sunset that saw her inhabit the body of the German cavalry officer to the sunrise that dropped her in her tracks. She'd slain 70 or 80 men and a couple of women. Men were plentiful here, but the women seemed fewer and further between. Neither sex had stood its ground for long, and she had sighed through everyone she came across in the city of Amiens with joyful, reckless abandon. Once they'd finished with the slaughter, they put the city to the torch and proceeded cross-country, eventually finding the Chateau de Blois, where they slew the German medical staff and all of their patients. She could not be killed, as far as she could tell, and this body did not flag or fatigue. The cavalry sword that had been pristine when she first pulled it from its sheath was now nicked and dulled from use. It would still do the trick, but what she coveted was an axe, and she had yet to find one suitable to her needs. When the sun rose, along with the 20-odd dead men that had rallied to her over the course of the night, she stumbled and collapsed. Her last thought, as death-like sleep embraced her, was the desire for a different form. She desperately wanted the power of being a woman again. When the sun set, they all rose together and commenced the hunt again. To her mild dismay, she was in the same corpse she had departed from at dawn that morning. She picked up the trail almost immediately. It was just a whisper on the wind, an instinct, but she listened, following it the same way an animal would. It led them into the gardens of the empty chateau that she and her gang of killers murdered their way through the previous night. When she reached the blocked garden door, she knew there would be good hunting through this portal. She had the biggest men use their bodies as rams to try to break through. When they did, withering machine gun fire cut their feet out from under them. The Red Girl had been shot several times the night before, but all in the torso, which did not slow her. When she saw that her men were now useless without their legs, it taught her that the prey was adapting. They were learning how to survive. The thought of that gave her a thrill. Killing peasants was boring. Killing warriors was glorious. She sent half her men to flank whoever was firing into the doorway. Then she sat, waiting patiently for an opportunity to present itself. As Jonah Unger started into the well, there had been another bam, and the handcart they had wedged the garden door shut with shuddered. Durant, Isaiah, Strothman, and Francois, awaiting their turn to drop into the well, watched the door, fear stirring in their bellies. Strothman whispered to Jonah, "Hail! Hurry!" Jonah's foot stepped on James's fingers, almost sending him tumbling down onto Halstead and Caitlin. It did not dislodge him, but it certainly spurred his descent. Bam! Isaiah scratched at the stubble on his chin. Fuck. Bam! Isaiah swung the Lewis gun off of his back. Durant whispered to him, "What are you doing?" Isaiah shrugged. "I guess I aim to shoot some motherfuckers." He racked the slide on the Lewis gun, chambering the first round. He glanced at Francois, who drew his cutlass in silent agreement. Isaiah stood. He set off at a jog back into the orchard. Strothman threw his leg over the well mouth and began lowering himself in. Bam! The door in the garden wall broke halfway open and knocked the cart sideways. There was cackling laughter from beyond the wall. Durant looked at Isaiah, who had found cover behind the trunk of a pear tree about 30 yards away. He dropped the bipod and ranged the machine gun on the doorway. Strothman's head disappeared into the well. Durant grabbed the well cover. He swung it on its hinges, shutting it tight, leaving it virtually invisible. He looked at Francois and whispered, "Come on, we'll lead him away from the well." Francois reached into his satchel and pulled out a pair of Mills grenades. He handed them to Durant. "You, left of door, I would go right. When they come, we draw them apart. Oui?" Durant nodded, though his instincts told him clever hunters would only choose one victim to pursue at a time. Francois ran to the far side of Isaiah and crouched. Bam! The door broke loose from its frame. Isaiah pulled the trigger, and the MG sent rounds spinning into the doorway. At the first demons in horizon blue trying to pass through, he aimed low, at knee level, and let rip with staccato bursts. The bullets clipped the first three that tried to get through, then they stopped coming. Durant and Francois ran across the orchard, flanking the doorway on either side, about 20 yards apart, grenades in their hands. The legs of the three demons that Isaiah had clipped were useless, riddled with his bullets. They used their hands and began to scramble through the grass toward Francois. Francois pulled the pin on a grenade and rolled it into their midst. It exploded with a bang, blowing their arms out from under them, collapsing their useless torsos to the ground. Francois pulled another grenade from his satchel and held it at the ready. A stretch of silence. Then Isaiah whistled sharply, and the MG opened fire again. This time the round sailed to the corner of the wall 30 yards behind Francois, as a band of dead men tried to come around the corner. Isaiah was able to drop a pair of them, but three streaked past his fusillade and ran toward Francois. Francois pulled the pin and threw his grenade. It blew, felling the two rearmost demons, and Francois charged, meeting the last one head-on. His cutlass clashed with the axe the demon tried to take his head with, knocking it aside. Then Francois ducked low, cutting the demon's legs out from under it, spinning away before it grabbed hold of him. Isaiah kept up his fire on the corner the demons had come around, hitting knees, shins, and boots as more of the demons tried to find an edge. Durant crept to the doorway into the gardens of Chateau de Bois. Beyond it, out of his sight, he heard murmured talking. He did not understand the language, but he could tell that there was fierce debate taking place. He pulled the pin on a grenade and tossed it through the portal in the direction of the voices. Then he turned tail and ran. The explosion was followed by screams, but not of pain, of rage. Isaiah fired one final burst, and the MG was empty. He hollered, "Out!" toward Francois and Durant. Then he picked up his hatchet and ran into the deep woods behind him, away from the orchard and the chateau. Francois ran across the orchard, crisscrossing the position Isaiah had been firing from. He disappeared into the woods, far from the well, just as the demons began to stream around the corner of the chateau's walls, leaping over the bodies of the ones Isaiah had mown down. Durant ran too, in the opposite direction as Francois. A half-dozen of the demons saw him go. They broke from the horde chasing Francois and ran after him, yipping and shrieking with delight. He led them along the chateau's walls for about 300 yards. He reached the front edge of the estate and made his choice, cutting right, heading for the front door of the chateau itself. He cleared the steps and burst through the door before his pursuers turned the corner.